Hi, my name is Nina Abacahook, and today I'll be talking about the mercury contamination that took place at 720 and 732 Grand Street, Hoboken, Hudson County, New Jersey. If you take a look at the map on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the location where this mercury contamination was discovered, indicated by the green star. The objectives for today's presentation include an overview of mercury and the threats contamination pose, learning the history of the Grand Street site and the actions put into place to clean it up, and understanding the site's current status post-intervention. Here we have our table of contents, which gives us a quick look at what we will be discussing today, including defining mercury poisoning, history of the site, what was done to clean it up, and the condition of the property today. So, what is mercury? There are three forms of mercury: elemental, inorganic, and organic. This table shows their common exposure routes and how they vary depending on its form. The most common cause of mercury exposure in the U.S. is organic methylmercury via ingestion of fish and shellfish. Elemental mercury is second most common form of mercury contamination and is seen more often in an industrial setting. This is what happened at the Grand Street site. Elemental mercury is a shiny silver-white metal historically referred to as quicksilver and is liquid at room temperature. The pools of mercury discovered at the Grand Street site were in this elemental form, and contamination was primarily via inhalation by the residents. So, what does mercury poisoning do? First, it's important to understand that the normal range for urine mercury concentration is less than 20 micrograms per liter. Exceeding that amount affects the ability to feel, see, taste, and move. As the levels of mercury in the body rise, more symptoms will appear, a few of which are displayed in the table. These symptoms may vary depending on a person's age and exposure levels. Children may develop problems affecting their nervous and digestive system development and could suffer kidney damage. 65% of the residents at the Grand Street site tested above the normal range following discovery of contamination of mercury. Now let's take a look at the history of the Grand Street site. The site was contaminated as a result of over 50 years of production of mercury vapor lamps and mercury connector switches, which were made at this facility on site from 1910 to about 1965. Here we can see an actual newspaper clipping from the time that the Cooper Hewitt Electric Company was reporting their mercury light bulbs from this factory. It's ironic that it says maximum return on lighting when it caused maximum damage to the site itself. In 1993, the site was purchased by the Grand Street artists to turn into their new home, and construction began. By 1994, people began moving in. During renovations on the 5th floor in 1995, puddles of mercury were observed in the subfloor. At time of discovery, this area consisted of 16 residential spaces, 1 townhouse, and a parking lot. The residential company hired an environmental company for cleanup, but later that same year, in November of 1995, another resident reported contamination on the 4th floor of the building. At this time, the Hoboken Board of Health detected mercury levels in the air which exceeded EPA standards, and further actions were implemented. The site was addressed in 2 phases: initial action to protect human health and a long-term remedial phase focused on cleanup of the entire site. The initial action took place from 1995 to 1997. A short-term cleanup, called a removal action, temporarily relocated affected residents from the metallic mercury and mercury vapors, investigated the extent of mercury contamination at the site, provided 24-hour security, maintained the building to prevent exposure to the elements, and prevented further off-site migration of the mercury. Mercury vapor levels were collected in each floor by the Hoboken Board of Health in November and December of 1995. For reference, the minimal risk level is 0.2 micrograms per cubic meter based on 160-hour workweek exposure. The line graph shows that in both the 4th and 5th floors where contamination was found, the levels increased significantly over the course of a month. In December of 1995, the Board of Health collected urine samples from the building's 31 residents. As discussed previously, the normal range for urine mercury is less than 20 micrograms per liter. From the bar graph, we can see that the majority of the residents tested above the normal limits. To be exact, 65% of the residents had hazardous urine mercury levels, which can be seen in the pie graph displayed. Long-term cleanup of the site took place from 1997 to 2007. Following investigations to determine the nature and extent of the contamination at the site, EPA selected the long-term remedy in September of 1997, and the EPA placed the Grand Street site on the national priorities list, making it possible for money from the Superfund to be used for all costs related to the site. It was decided the building couldn't be saved, and so a plan for relocation, demolition, and disposal was put into place. This plan included permanent relocation of residents from the site. 15 families and 22 businesses were successfully relocated. Demolition of the 2 contaminated buildings, sampling, excavation, and off-site disposal of contaminated soil at EPA-approved facilities. During this excavation, 2 containers of waste material, one of which was determined to be RCRA hazardous waste, were removed from the site. And lastly, groundwater and off-site soil monitoring to assess potential impacts to the groundwater attributable to the site. Demolition of the townhouse and formal industrial building at the site began in March of 2002 under EPA oversight, and it was completed by the summer of 2003. In 2005, the soil samples from the site no longer pose a risk to human health or the environment. Here we can see a picture of the site following its demolition. Following cleanup, EPA took the site off the Nationals priority list in August of 2007. All planned remedial actions for the site have been completed. Under current conditions at the site, potential or actual human exposures are under control. The site was purchased by private entities, and in 2007, residential buildings were put up. Today, people have made this site their home. A recent listing of an apartment at the site was on sale for $1.6 million. Do you think that the residents are aware of the site's history? Looking at a summary of what was discussed today, we learned that the Grand Street site was contaminated with mercury during the 55 years it was used as a mercury vapor lamp production site. After converting to housing, residents discovered pools of mercury and were eventually permanently evacuated. The site was deemed a Superfund site by the EPA, and the cleanup process ran from 1995 to 2007. Today, the site has been declared safe and is once again a residential space. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation on the Grand Street mercury contamination.